Hey everybody, it's Friday. Welcome to Snap Take. I'm Glazer of the Snap Judgments podcast, and before we go any further, like and sub for the best Marvel Snap Takes every weekday. Today, we've got our second, I guess, but first official of the weekly OTA changes. Also, I think these OTA changes give us a brand new best deck. So far, so good. Before we go any further, just a reminder that you have until Monday to get in on the giveaway. The giveaway is visible right now on your screen, and this Twitter link will be in the comments. I'm not going to read it to you. That's ridiculous. You guys are more than capable of clicking on a link if you would like one of 6. I know it says 5 on the screen. That's the one change. Nebula season passes. Go to the Twitter and do the thing. Cool. We've got our OTA changes. I just threw all 4 of the cards into one spot. Now, the Sandman deck was nerfed fundamentally into oblivion. That's where we got to start. Sandman was the dominant force of the meta. I was actually talking to Vin Kelsier, the main writer over here at SnapFan. Today, we were running data between SnapFan and Untapped, and what we found was Sandman was the most played deck in the meta. It was only like 11%, which is lower than some of the most. But when Sandman is the most played, even if it's very close to Galactus and Patriot, that's gonna be a problem. Cool. So Sandman is now a 5/3. Since you're probably following me on Twitter now anyway, given the giveaway, I had this interaction on Twitter with Glenn Joes the other day. We talked with Bootman about go wide strategies and why Sandman was needed to be that strong when Wave exists. Well, Glenn replied, I think Wave's certainly more fun and interesting card. She's also just as much, if not more, a Ram card than a restrictive card and has other synergies and is way softer with Death and She-Hulk. I think that softness is what they were going for. Wave being more fun and interesting is what they're pushing with this. I fully expect with the change to Sandman and the buff to Enchantress for Wave, whether that be Doom Wave or Death Wave, to see an awful lot more play. Make sense to everybody? Here's why. Ideally for Sandman decks, you're playing Sandman and Electro ramp decks, right? That's the current base home for Sandman. You play Sandman on turn 4 through Psylocke, Wave, or Electro. Cool. Completely doable. Well, if you do that, your Sarah decks, your decks that really want to go wide, are very often going to have Enchantress. When Sandman was a 5, it felt very bad to play a 4/4 Enchantress on that 5/5. You basically lost the game at that point fairly often, right? Okay. Well, now what you can do in those instances is you get to basically play an Enchantress on that Sandman for double that Sandman's power. Yes, you're doing on a different turn, but your turn 4 was ineffective. You're dedicating your 5 to this, and that means you can compete on 6. That weakens Sandman incredibly. You know what that doesn't hit, though? Wave. So decks that really want to limit plays are going to end up playing cards like Wave instead of Sandman, is my theory at the very least, given that Sandman has taken such a big nerf. The nerf to Lizard 2 is a nerf to Sandman, because when you were limited to only one card, it was really, really hard to get into playing all those cards. The other way that Lizard is really not as nerfed is in those Sarah decks, which can still afford to play him, because Sarah is now playing Enchantress. Enchantress in all decks means that Lizard's -4 power, if your opponent has 4 cards here, can be cancelled, countered for a surprise +4 power. Huge difference that can win a lot of games. That's our meta effect so far. We've got more. Cool. So Sandman should go down in the meta for a Rise of Wave. Is Sandman still playable? Probably, but he will be a much smaller part of the meta. He'll be a deck that wins queues by being a surprise, not by being just a shutdown. Enchantress now goes in a ton of decks. She was already supposed to be in a ton of decks. We've been sort of hinting around that she might be better than Shang-Chi in the current meta right now. Well, we're there. She's better than Shang. Cool. You make her double Shang's strength, and you're just there. We're done. Conversation over. Enchantress should be in most decks. She should be one of the 10-ish most played cards in the game. Stopping Sandman, stopping cards like Patriot, like Devil Dino, like Darkhawk, is what she's telling us to do. So far, so good. Now, we've got Enchantress in all these decks. The other major decks in the meta, the four big decks that were played a lot, were Dark Arc Dino, Sandman, Galactus, not affected by the Enchantress buff, but also just fragile, and Patriot. Okay, three of the four decks that are currently or were currently heavy in the meta are now stopped by Enchantress. We're also saying by buffing Enchantress, we're not going to weaken Patriot right now. Weakening Patriot means that just a different ramp strategy takes over the game. So instead of that, you have a much stronger Enchantress. Play her. Let her weaken those Patriot, Devil Dino, Dark Hawk decks. But that also introduces a level of counterplay into the game. Because Cosmo exists, Leech exists. If you want to stop this on the last turn of the game, Leech comes back into the meta as a play on turn 5. I spent a lot of today testing this out. I played a bunch of remember that original KM Best Thanos deck? It wasn't his. It was someone on his Discords, I believe, less. But whatever. The one that ran like Magneto and Blue Marvel and like Leech as like a lockjaw deck. That deck. Great. Well, I stopped losing with that deck today. It gets really strong right now again. Fundamentally because you can tempo out enough energy that a lot of decks are back to Leech being good on turn 5. I hate Leech, and taking that 3 power is often a negative, but when decks want to go wide, when decks want to do these powerful things on the last turn of the game, and that's what's just been incentivized, Leech is once again a good card. Just a good card with cost, but also a good card with cost that's not being countered by the current counter card du jour, Enchantress. The other real card to see that you're going to see a lot of is Cosmo. Cosmo is, however, hard to play, especially in Patriot, because you need to make sure that you have space for your Ultron. You need to make sure you have space for your Mystique. So that's going to weaken the power of those decks. The Darkhawk Dino decks, I have to be a little more careful with their Rocks and their Coulson, but it's probably easiest for those Darkhawk Dino decks of the major meta decks to slot in Cosmo. All right. That more or less covers Enchantress. The big winner of the Enchantress buff, I think, by the way, is Zabu and Saradex. Zabu, Saradex, those ones that want to play like Enchantress and Shang, maybe Absorbing Man with like a Hit Monkey, get really, really strong based off this Enchantress buff. They were already one of the top cube rates decks in the game, but their win rate was kind of middling. This should help that. Those decks can also still run Lizard as a way with Enchantress to turn it off. Lizard's gonna see less play. The big winner of the Lizard nerf being -4, not -3. I think there's a couple. I think Scorpion is the one that everyone has. Scorpion gets better, at least for a few weeks. Pretty soon, High Evolutionary is going to be out. And once High Evolutionary is in the meta, again, Enchantress is here, right? Because Luke Cage is going to be in every deck. Luke Cage means Lizard isn't going to lose strength, 1. And 2, Scorpion is going to be kind of useless. Scorpion, when Luke Cage is in many decks, is not a very good card. Okay, what other 2s really benefit? Well, Nebula's coming out. With Lizard sucking up all the oxygen, it was really hard to find room for Armor. Armor and Nebula is a ridiculous combo. Nebula is going to be a completely busted card. Stay tuned next week for more on that. Armor now helps replace Lizard. And then the really big winner is Jeff, the baby land shark. Lizard versus Jeff was a decision I was making in a lot of decks. At this point, unless the deck has a specific reason, like a lane lockdown, I guess it wants both in that case. Unless the deck has a specific reason or way to counter Lizard's negative effect, Jeff is very, very often just going to be better. Love making that baby land shark better. All right, that covers 3 of the nerfs. 1 nerf, 2 nerfs, 1 buff. Sandman nerfed, and I think killed. Lizard nerfed, but just changes what decks he's in, makes him less of an auto-include. And Enchantress buffed, and Enchantress now becomes, in many, many decks, an absolute auto-include. The last card to talk about is Shauna. Shauna went from a 4-2 that puts a bunch of 1s to a 4-4. But to be completely honest, I don't think this is enough. But I'm guessing I'm wrong. Dara is winning a lot of games with this Shauna right now. He's got a deck that I'll test out and bring to you as soon as I can. But I don't want to just take an OP player's word winning at very high infinite. This has got to get tested a little bit. Shauna might be decent. She's a good way to put a lot of power on the board on the last turn of the game, even if you're getting 3 extra 1/1s, right? That's a 4/7. 4/7 is ahead of curve. 4/6 is about what you really want here. And she's probably giving you something better than that. She's probably on the last turn of the game giving you something like 4/10. And that's a really nice rate, right? If you're getting a 4/10, then she's probably worth it. And yes, I know it's through multiple lanes, but please stop thinking of it that way. There's a reason Mr. Fantastic is great. And even if you're not playing on the last turn of the game, she's a really good way to get priority for decks that care about that. I don't have as many Shauna thoughts. She's going to need some testing. The other cards I think I have a pretty good handle on. I do think these nerfs have changed the best deck in the game. I think this is now the best deck in the game. I think this Darkhawk Stature List is the best deck in the game. This version exactly is built by Safety Blade. Safety Blade is a Marvel Snap Zone creator and friend of the show. Wonderful person, my current favorite Australian in the whole wide world. Hey, Safety. He built this deck. It's been played to 254 games, which is a small sample, but not impossibly small, at a 64% win rate and a 0.79 cube rate. I want to go over a little bit of what this deck does. So it moves cards in 3 ways. It's got Polaris, Jeff, and Nightcrawler to get a 1/5. 1/5 is crazy stats. Darkhawk makes Korg a 1/4 or Rockslide a 4/10. Assume you can get them both out. The Black Bolt Stature combo is 6 mana for 15. 6 for 15 is bigger than basically any 6 in the game, and you get the added benefit of discarding an opponent's card. You can control where opponents play. You can get into difficult locations. You can counter ongoings. The only card you have to be careful, really, of is Darkhawk. And you can kill their big things. This deck puts a ton of power on the board. It's extremely smooth and extremely powerful. Literally, right before recording, another Snap Judge co-host, Chris Lavin, I sent him this deck earlier. I was like, you gotta try this. He was like, holy shit. I'm playing that deck, and it's the smoothest thing in the world. I feel like I can't lose. That's what this deck feels like. It's absolutely crazy. And I'm going to tell you straight up, here's what I'm doing. I'm pulling Nightcrawler, I'm adding Nebula, and if you Killmonger me, you Killmonger me. I think Nightcrawler is great. I think the way to make Spider-Man a 1/5 is incredible, but I think Nebula forcing plays is going to be absolutely absurdly strong, which is also worthwhile to say. Nebula should have been silly in Sandman decks as they were, because when you can only play one card, what are the odds that that is in the Nebula lane where you need to contest? It basically gives away other lanes. So Sandman had to be weakened because Nebula is coming to the game, and Sandman on 4 means she's very often going to be a 1/5 or 1/7, which is, absolutely silly. So Sandman had to be weakened a bit for Nebula. Nebula, however, does. Nebula also had some synergy with Lizard, where you play Nebula in one lane, Lizard in another, and they can only really play into one of those. They're only very likely to be able to get enough cards to stop that power gain in one of those 2 spots. So now Lizard is a little weaker if that's the place the opponent chooses to contest. But that information Nebula is going to give the player about where they want to contest, where the opponent's actually trying to win, is going to be huge. So I'm going to put Nebula in here just because Nebula is so freaking strong. I feel like I have to run her. She doesn't actually synergize with anything, but I think Nebula is at a power level where you have to have a reason not to run her, kind of like you did with Zabu at first, and Nebula is going to have to be nerfed at some point. However, right now, and I think at the start of next season, this is the best deck. Your turn 5/6 play is 15 power. You can play that on top of Darkhawk for another 10-ish. You get Zabu out, and you're playing 3/6, 3/6. You've got a multiple, a 1/5 and a 1/7, along with a Nightcrawler to help enable that, a Jeff to get you into locations that you can't, Polaris to counter Galactus. This is, again, what I would argue is the very best deck in the game. The stats are not huge, they're not overwhelming, but they back me up. I think this is an A-level deck and what I would play. All right, that's it for today's show. Please don't forget the giveaway. Check us out on Twitter. Make sure you like and follow the video. Check back Monday for another Snap Take, and we'll see you then.